from the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today, to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in and explore the future.
Hello and welcome back to an episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today, I'm very pleased. Joining me, Kingsley Maunder. Kingsley, the way I love to do it is I keep it to my guests to introduce themselves. Tell me a little bit more about you, your journey, what you're currently up to. Today, we're going to talk about, startups. We're going to talk about idea and how to take it to the next level. But again, I like to keep it to my guests to tell us more first about their journey. So, Kingsley, the floor is yours.
Amazing. Well, firstly, thank you for having me here. I greatly appreciate it, Ahmed. At the age of 10, I was calling myself an inventor, thinking of ideas to solve problems. When I got to university, I was trying to work out the best way to do that, and felt technology was the best approach. So I started to study computer science. I finished that. And when I finished that, I was very fortunate to come into the dot-com era. And through that, interested into the startup ecosystem. And I was in that space for almost 20 years. Built products used by many of the world's biggest brands, products that are built from scratch. And, Disney, EA, Sports, Snap are just some of the examples. Over that time, 2 of those startups went on to exit, and the third one raised over $180 million. But yes, of course, with all those successes, you do get a lot of failures, and those were where the biggest lessons were learned. And I have taken those lessons and put them into a book called The SALT Test: How to Take an Innovative Product from Idea to Scale. And it gives very practical advice. If you have an idea, how do you take that idea? How do you build it out and make it into a profitable and scalable business? It's my opportunity to give back to the startup world, which I have a lot of passion about.
Great. So we share the same passion, Kingsley, by the way. And thank you again for being here with me today. Let's start with the SALT test. It's a framework, right? So, and feel free to take your time explaining to us, right? So maybe first kind of an elevator pitch about it. And then if you want to tell me what's the core thing that you focus on, so fellow founders they can learn from you, Kingsley.
Absolutely. So the really comes down to, why did I call it the SALT test, the name behind it? And it comes back to a story that Thomas Edison had a very grueling interview process if you wanted to join him. And the final test is he'll take you down to his cafeteria, and you'd sit and you'd eat, and he would see if you added salt to your food before you tasted it. Because if you added salt to your food first, you made an assumption. You made an assumption that the food was not salty enough. And assumptions are killers for innovation. And that's why I called it the SALT test, because the strong theme throughout the book is do not make assumptions. So, unvalidated assumptions. So it's a very risky balance, because if you have an idea, it's necessary to make assumptions. You need to, envisage who your target market will be. You need to have that goal on who's going to use it, what problem does it solve, what does the solution look like. Right at the beginning, from day one, those are all assumptions, and they're necessary. I think the risk then comes down to when we start to treat those assumptions as facts. And that's what the book is very much about. And it's a step-by-step process where it says, okay, there are assumptions you have to make. state those assumptions and in a particular order. And I'm happy to talk through
Sure.
that order at a later date, or whenever you ask. State them up front, but do not treat them as fact. Because then the next phase is to take those assumptions and to prove them, and to then prove them in a very specific order, which we can go through.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're gonna go through now. You talk, Kingsley, about stress testing ideas before investing time and money. Um, what are like the top two signals I would say, like that can tell us if an idea is or is not ready to scale, in your opinion?
It comes down to one of the assumptions you need to make is, well, right in the beginning is set your objectives. So what are your objectives early on? And I would say it depends where you are in the process, maybe to be more specific. Because you might be sitting there going, okay, an assumption is that here's my target market and have this problem. And therefore, the success of that is you would say, right, here is, I'm going to speak to 30 people. And out of those 30 people, I will set a benchmark that X number will have this problem, will show that they have this problem. But to go into a little bit of detail around that, I think I like to have two numbers. The one is a success metric. If you go above that number, it's successful. But I also think it's really important to have a number below that, whereby if you go below that number, you need to stop. Because often we don't hit that number and we find excuses to keep going and to keep trying. But so you have that middle ground, which is important because you can always iterate and innovate on your ideas to improve on that number in a certain way. So you might say, okay, well, if I've come up with a solution and I'm presenting it, people might not agree with it, or the number, the expected number proportion I thought to don't agree with it. But if you adjust it a bit and you test it a bit, that number may go up. However, I think there should be a fail number as well. If you go below that number, you should agree beforehand that that's the fail number. Let's just cut and move on to something else, or to pivot.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think, like here it could be, especially maybe for first time founders, Kingsley, there might be something which we call it noise traction versus real traction when they are into this validation phase. So what's your take on like what is real and what is noise?
I one of the key things, if we're talking at quantitative data, which we can go into, but broadly speaking, quantitative data, as long as you're key on your metrics that you want to measure, they don't really lie. The quantitative data, the numbers don't really lie, as long as upfront you have a clear understanding of what you're trying to achieve. Now, when it comes to qualitative data, when you're talking to potential customers and users, that is very difficult. That is probably one of the biggest trip ups that we have as startup founders. And the key there is we're so excited about an idea, we will often go to people who we think have this problem and we'll pitch it and we'll tell them the idea. And people are generally very polite and they'll come back to you and say, oh, I love the idea. Yes, I would use it. And, tell you exactly what you want to hear, and you'll go away and you'll build it. And then when you come to present it to them or give them the actual product, they turn around and say, well, actually, I don't have the budget, or I want a little bit of this, and then that just drag on a bit longer. So the way to get around that is to not talk in hypothetical terms. Now it comes back down to what I believe is the starting point for all of this, and this came was mentioned in one of your recent interviews with Liam when he spoke about a product-led approach, a problem-led approach. Apologies, a problem-led approach. And that is where I feel that, an innovative product should start. What problem are you solving for who? And when you use that approach, you start to engage with people and you start to ask them not about the future or how they would use it. It's about when did they last have that problem, or have they ever had that problem? When did they have that problem? How did they solve that problem? So you're starting to make it very practical in that you are referring to how people have had this experience in the past, not about how they might have it, because that is the trap moving forward.
Kingsley, that's good. Like I get it, and I think a lot of founders they fall into, let's call it, a trap, which is, again, I like to call it. It's not my term. Like every single entrepreneurship startup book I was able to put my hands on, we start with the hypothesis, right? Like that there is a problem for specific people, and so on. Uh, so while, because you mentioned talking to customers and customers can do this, can you tell you, yeah, we are excited, we're gonna buy, and then when the time. So can I expect this beforehand? So instead of me waiting, you just mentioned few, but I mean, if I want to, like founders are always in rush. We know this. Is there like kind of signs, maybe from the first meeting that we can spot? Like maybe because we are going, by the way, and this is why I'm asking you this, back to the noise thing, because maybe I have a real problem, but maybe I'm choosing the wrong, not persona, even like maybe the wrong companies. Maybe I should go to other companies. So before I give up and I pivot, like what kind of things like I can still do to make sure that, okay, I'm 100% sure, like, no, this is, I don't want to waste my time anymore. These guys, is very obvious they are serious, but very obvious like they will not buy this. So in your experience, of course.
Yes, and that's why I a lot of the books to say solve a problem, absolutely, and I like to qualify, and maybe I said a little bit earlier, problem for the right target market. And sometimes you will be solving a problem, but sometimes you're hitting the wrong target market, and that's why you experiment with that. And so yes, this problem may exist, but it may not exist for this particular target market, or they're not willing to spend any money on it, or they're not willing to invest in it. And often we one thing you should look at is how, if they have a problem, how do they currently solve that problem? And sometimes sometimes there isn't a need for a solution. Yes, the problem exists and they have a workaround. And an example I have from my experience is we built a tool, this is many years ago, which allowed brands to just search the internet, and if a photograph of a celebrity or anybody was seen wearing their brand, we would alert them and tell them, and we thought this was a great product, but in reality they turn around and said, well, I just have an intern that uses that. And so that was a very cheap solution for a technical problem, and they're like, well, I don't really, so the alternative was much easier. And a lot of startups have this problem when you find yourself competing with Excel, for example. It's a very powerful tool, but it's been around for ages, and we always think we can build something better. But ultimately, a lot of these companies and users just say, well, I'll just stick it in Excel and use Excel, or WhatsApp. We create these amazing ways to communicate, and they turn around and say, I'll just use WhatsApp. And so understanding what you're competing against is really important. And then you've got to work out whether they are actually willing to shift. So that comes down to another key point is, in order for people to change their behaviors, and remember, you might be selling to businesses, but ultimately you're selling to people. In order to change their behaviors, you've got to have something that's significantly better, because we are lazy. As humans, we are generally lazy, and we don't like risk. And therefore, we need something that's significantly better in order to change people's behaviors?
Uh, like it's like stuck with a lot of people, about when it comes to behaviors and the way they deal with it. I think one thing I noticed personally, Kingsley, is also it's not related, to tech or anything. It's also for the founders um, to understand that also the personality of the people that they are talking to, right? Especially if they are coming with something very innovative, if they are coming, as we call it, like it's a kind of cliche, I know, like disrupting the status quo, right? So people would show also sometimes they play defense, we call it, or they push back. And I think there is a skill here where the founders, they have to understand that sometimes, like, this is also a factor there. Like, people would not accept something, like, if especially something really innovative. And this is why I want to ask you about innovation here. So sometimes innovation looks or sounds exciting, but execution is everything. Where do you see usually founders fall short, when moving from prototype to actual adoption?
So if if I if I go back to that, what you've mentioned has reminded me, and so through my career, I moved from an engineer to multiple spaces, especially as an entrepreneur. And I was fortunate enough to be sent on a course called solution selling. And solution selling is really almost foundational around what we're talking about, understanding the problem. So if you went in to a client, you're not selling your product, you're understanding what problems they have. And what you ultimately do is you have that discussion with them and they share their issues and they share their problems. And you know what the solution is, because hopefully you've got the solution for it. But then ultimately they come to the realization on what that solution is. And you have that solution. And so that is, for me, that was like, this was many years ago. It was foundational for me in many ways going on that. So it is, if they have a problem and if you have a solution, and ideally you talk through that problem, you talk through the solution, you have the solution, or maybe you can adjust what you have for that. You don't want to build a one-off for specific companies, but if it helps you build the right product, that is key. I think that's, sorry, I kind of forgot your second point. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, you just answered it, like, about like, so it's good you mentioned the solution selling, Kingsley, because uh, now I've seen founders who are talented, like they didn't work in a sales organization before, but they are so talented that they understand this, especially if they come from the same position, I would say, where the customer is coming from. So it makes sense, and this is coming back to this difference between you know a customer and the user also, right? So this distinction, right? um because I think one of the underrated skills that founders usually, they think, like, I will build it, they will follow me. Like, I will just make a noise in the market and everyone will come. um so if you want to point to one, I would say, kind of hearing that you see founders repeating, and you wish that they really unlearn it, they should stop repeating this, what would that be?
I think if we go beyond what I've already discussed, and I want to go beyond sort of solving the problem, and I think the next one is, when it comes to the solution, is founders either go one of two ways usually. And the one is that just end up building a Me Too product, and that
Mm-hmm.
is very similar to what's in the market or just slightly better. I think that's it. It's slightly better, but in reality, as I said, we're lazy as individuals. It has to be significantly better, for people to change their behaviors. So you need to come in with something that is significantly better. You can't just come in with something that is slightly better, and that's so important. The other one or the other extreme is innovators love to come in with something that is so much better, but it doesn't actually also do the foundational work. So there's two things here whereby if you give a product to someone, it has to have the benchmark of what it needs to achieve. If somebody uses it, it'll do the basic stuff very well. It still has to do the basic stuff very well. And on top of that, it has to be significantly better. So it can't be very similar, and it can't be so innovative that it doesn't do the basic stuff.
Right. Now, let me ask you something, Kingsley. We are living in the AI era, right? So, in your opinion, this journey where we apply the SALT test, right, and the SALT framework, anything where us as founders we can leverage AI to maybe again, because we are lazy, we want to be as fast as possible, and we know, like, honestly, AI can help in some of the tasks that we do. So anything that AI can be leveraged in the salt test itself, and feel free to revise or to tell us again about the key ones that we should not skip as founders, and also where AI can fit into it.
Oh, absolutely. In actual fact, almost from when the book was first written to today, it's almost become outdated in its timelines, because I would say the discovery work would take X number of weeks, but now it can be hours and days thanks to AI. And on that note, so the model underneath, that I write about it in the SALT test is called the growth map, and there's an online version, growthmap.org, and so in the book originally it was take out a piece of paper, go through the first phase, which is the opportunity, what problem, for who, how do they currently solve it. That's the first phase, and the next phase is the solution. And eventually I thought, well, actually, digital world, so I made a digital version of the growth map. And following that, with the advent of AI, you can now go in and say, who's my target market? Here's the problem I'm trying to solve. Who's the target market? And come back to you within minutes. And it then says, what problem have they got? And come back to you within minutes. So, within that space, you can go from, coming up with assumptions and have a certain level of validation, because we've got to trust AI to a certain level, not completely. You can go through that growth map and build it almost entirely with AI now in less than 30 minutes. And I think that is the way forward. So for me, this is anybody who has an idea. It's incredibly exciting because you can just experiment and prove those ideas within days now. Maybe not right now, or probably right now, but very soon you can probably do that within 24 hours. I wouldn't say in the next couple of years. So if you have an idea, you don't have to spend time or thousands. You can, with the advent of good AI tools, you can validate your ideas in no time.
Kingsley, would be any difference between, I'm not a B2C expert, would be any difference between B2B and B2C products?
I think it's what you mentioned earlier. What's the difference between a customer and a user? If you are B2C, your users are generally also your customers. But let me go with B2B first, because in many instances, the person who has the purse strings is the customer, but they are not often the ones who are actually the users as well. So, I think Slack is a really good example. When they first came out, they really targeted the users and they gave it away for free. But then the customers were the operations teams, anybody who wants to make this more efficient. So they had to sell it to the customer. But in their instance, they did it through the users. They did a sort of ground swelling through the users. So you need to build your product that's really good for the users, but build it in a way and have your pitch that works for the customer as well. So that's the B2B side. If you go back to B2C, that is often the same person. The person who uses it is also the decision maker, with the exception if you're dealing with parents and children.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. And this example I always use, like, about like who's the like especially in kids products, like it's the child that decides what they want, but the budget comes from us as
That's right.
parents, right? So it's a nice analogy, I would say. Now, one more thing, regarding uh I would say understanding what the user want, and you just gave an example of Slack, right? And we know about iteration, so which sometimes we call it pivot, and we talked about it at the beginning also as well. Now, this pivot, in your opinion, Kingsley, is it okay to be something very radical, like in the case of Slack, a company that started it as a game company, and then they figured out, oh, like we've built like an amazing internal communication tool that we think companies use, versus, and people, again, people, they say like it's luck, it worked for them, while we've seen like some other startup that they pivoted, but it's not like that big shift, right? So it's not like from making a game to a company communication tool or app. um from your experience, what is too much pivoting, what is acceptable, or the answer, it depends?
Answer is depends. But I truly believe that success leaves clues, and therefore you can follow that. And in the case of Slack and Instagram is another one, the success was that they could see the success. They could see that something was happening which they hadn't anticipated or expected, and the clues were there, and they were wise enough to follow those clues. um and the but then the other one is if you want to have a hard pivot. It depends on a hard pivot or a light pivot, and that comes back down to the problem you're trying to solve and for who. And the advantage of that is you don't want to pivot when you've gone too far down the road. You really, often the mistake is is innovators bias. I'll come back to this a bit, but it's innovators bias. We come up with a solution,
Hmm.
and we then try to find a problem and a target market to squeeze it into. So I think often the hard pivot is when a founder has made that mistake. They built a product, they believe it has a problem, they believe in the target market, they go out there, and then they're trying to find that gap. But then they may find in that process that something in there actually works. Once again, there's something in there that triggers something, and therefore they can use that bit of technology to solve that problem for that target market, and therefore that's a good opportunity to pivot. So I think if you've pivoted hard, I feel you've probably made a mistake, I'm sorry to say, to start off with, by not following that path. But if you go through the process, you can pivot, and you're much more likely to succeed.
Yeah, I think this is what you call it, Kingsley, in your book, the assumption trap, right? So, uh, yeah, and I always tell people, like, sometimes I'm not sure if we misput this. So we say, I tell people, like, yeah, do assumptions, but don't be, so attached to your assumptions, and so stubborn. uh I can understand, again, it's I think maybe ego, Kingsley. I don't know, like, maybe it's like, yeah, I've done it before, we've done things, and maybe I'm asking something quite, I start to question myself about, how we can put in the founders what we call, because when we talk about startups, we talk about innovation. And even if we are not inventing necessarily something new, we're enhancing something which exists already. And I've learned this on the show, by the way. It's not like me, because I knew it, because I thought like I knew it all, but end up I don't know anything yet. So a lot of my guests kept repeating thinking using first principles, right? And founders, often I see they don't go by this. Although, like themselves, they are maybe disrupting something, they keep, you know, saying, no, this should be done this way. And I know the reason why, because some founders actually, they were so stubborn that they succeed at the end. So here I think there is kind of a, I I don't know what to call it. If you can help me, Kingsley, in the whole thing, between, the signals we are getting from the market, between maybe what our team is telling us as founders, maybe the team is telling us, like, hey guys, like, this is not working, right? So, because at the end of the day, it's like a puzzle. And I think here, where also part of the signals we should be looking at is, you know what you also call it, and you just mentioned it, like the product growth map, right? So how I can put the whole thing together as a founder, like how I can really start to take, you know the results of my assumptions and the decision I took based on these assumptions, what the market is telling me, what my team is telling me, and then based on that, you know put the roadmap of what's coming next.
Yeah, and quite a lot to unpack there. I think ego, absolutely. I just want to go back to that ego. The other one is fear, I think, as well. Maybe I talk from experience in that I'm afraid that my solution won't work. I'm afraid to look into it and
Hmm.
find that it isn't a good solution. If I come up with a solution, I'm slightly afraid to dig into it and find that it doesn't give me the results I want. But my advice to any founder who is struggling, who's hit a roadblock, because I talk a lot about taking it from step by step. But if you're in a situation at the moment where you are sitting there and you feel like you're blocked, go through those steps one by one and see if you can identify any assumptions that you may have made on that journey, and start off with the problem and your target market and the solution, and do you have anything different? So go through those one by one and make sure you have properly validated all of those. And you may find at some point, for instance, that actually, yes, it does exist. There is a problem. I have a solution. But for example, you may find that your solution is just not different enough for people to change their behaviors. Or it does exist, but the target market is slightly different. And once again, all those clues could be there. It could come from your team. So to just try to pick up on those clues on where it could be.
Right. Now, I was looking on your website, and it was mentioned about the book over there. So you talk about lessons from Netflix, Snapchat, and Swift over there. Um, eh, Personal opinion, like, what's the story that really, always, get stuck with you all the time, especially when helping like fellow founders, like, you know, and of course, like it doesn't have to be one of these also, like who do you think nailed it really when it comes to this phase from idea to be ready to scale?
Yeah, I think it may not be a popular choice because they are so successful, but Amazon, if you think about it, they really they want they're they're now, and I believe the vision was to be an everything store. And if I can almost go back to what you said earlier on about founders having a vision, and Jeff Bezos will say, they have a 5-year vision or a 7-year vision, and they will stick with that vision. They'll be firm in their vision, but they'll be flexible on the details on how to get there. And I think that's so true. I think that is that's the vision I want to go for as a founder. If you have that vision, you can, but you need to be flexible in how you're going to get there. And I think they've done that very well. But going back to the origins of Amazon in the .com days, if you're going to buy something online, people weren't so sure about what they're going to buy. But if you buy a book, you buy a book. You know what you're going to get, pretty much. You're not like buying clothing with a different size, or, those variables are often taken out of the way, a book or a DVD. And once they got that traction, then they then grew. And you could see how they've grown to AWS because, they had that vision. Well, we're using the cloud. Why don't we then just expose this to everybody else? Or another one is with the Kindle. You can imagine Jeff Bezos saying, well, ultimately books are no longer going to exist. It hasn't happened, thankfully. But what is the future of books? And there's going to be this little device. And so why don't we then, look to replace books before anybody else and come out with a Kindle? And it was their first device that they ever launched. And you could see how they were cannibalizing their own business as they went along, and they constantly innovated. So that's,
Right.
I think, a really good example of that.
I agree with you, and also I help, part of giving back also. Sometimes I sit with people who have ambition to become entrepreneurs. And when we talk about, so there's a part about ideation, and there's another part about validation. And they see me repeating Amazon because I tell them, like, Amazon, when it comes to ideation, Jeff Bezos, like, spotted the opportunity reading a report that came in front of him when he was working in a financial institute, and then seeing the internet gonna grow, and he spotted the opportunity, and then he started to think, okay, what can I do, what can I sell? And he put the vision, I want to sell everything. And then how he narrowed down to your point about, okay, what's the easiest thing that doesn't have a lot of hassle? Books. Everyone read books, everyone can buy them. And then the way they scaled it, and I would call, like, they went into adjacent market from e-commerce perspective, and then they built the whole, AWS thing. So it's a master class. But I tell you, like, don't think it was an easy journey. Like, it took them years and years, to reach what they are here today. And they have to, of course, there were a lot of obstacles in front of them also, like from logistics and everything. So yeah, I agree with you on the example of Amazon, Kingsley. Now, if I want to ask you, for builders, like, in who are like now just on the verge to start, right? What's exciting you, Kingsley? Like, of course, other than AI is exciting everyone, but where do you see really there's a big opportunity for innovative product builders? I would not ask you in 10 years, 5 years, like in the foreseen future, I would say.
Yeah, I think the for builders, I think their exciting opportunity is having nowadays I mean, it's hard to say without, you said, without mentioning AI. It's hard not to. I would say for builders with the use of AI is to help you become more product focused. And, you can now merge those three core skills, the engineering, the product, and the design. If you can be in that space, then that's incredibly exciting. And I think with all the tools nowadays, even without AI, with all the tools that are out in the market at the moment, the opportunities to be in the middle of those three it is the most exciting, because a successful product needs to appeal to an audience, so needs that design element. It needs the more traditional product element. Are you solving a problem for who? What makes it different? What makes it unique? And then you have the engineering side. And so if you're a builder, and if you can merge, if you can move into that space as well, which is easier and easier with the tools that we have nowadays, I think it's incredibly exciting.
Great. As we are coming to an end, Kingsley, and again, thank you for your insights. Where people can get in touch, and maybe if you have any final thing to mention.
Sure, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I like to hear from people. So Kingsley Maunder at LinkedIn. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if you have assumptions, don't fall for the assumption trap. Think of the salt test. Every time you add salt to your food without tasting it, just think that that's an assumption that you've made. And please, if you're a startup founder that has any challenges, feel free to reach out. I'm doing this for the community. I want to give back to the community. So please feel free to reach out.
Lovely. Great. Of course, I will make sure that link to your website and to your LinkedIn profile. So on the website of Kingsley, you can find, also there's a link to the book. So go grab your copy from there. And if you want to get in touch, I will put also the LinkedIn profile. Kingsley, again, thank you very much for, your insights, for sharing, your expertise and knowledge with us today. I really appreciate that. And this is how I end my episodes. This is usually for the audience. If you just discovered our podcast, thank you for passing by. I hope you enjoyed. If you did so, give me a favor, subscribe, and share it with your friends and colleagues. Same as Kingsley, I'm trying to give back, bringing, thought leaderships, experts, founders, builders, investors, operators to the show to share their experience, so all of us, we can learn. And if you are one of the people who keeps coming again and again, thank you very much for, following the show, sending me your messages, and thank you for keeping the CTO show this year. Pretty much we are on November now. So since Feb, we never skipped a week without being in the top 200 charts in one of the countries of the Apple top 200 charts, in the entrepreneurship, sometimes in the business, sometimes overall, which is great. But I'm still waiting for my friends in the US. Maybe you can give me a push and we do it there. So we did a lot of countries, including the UK, by the way. We did it in Australia this year. We did it in Germany, Spain, Portugal, majority of European countries. So I'm waiting from my US friends to give me the push and reach the top 200 charts there. As I say always, stay tuned for a new episode. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.